Picture the Colosseum at noon. The sun is a white-hot coin nailed to the sky, the air so thick with blood, vinegar, and sweat that you can taste iron on your tongue. 80,000 Romans are on their feet, one single living creature with 80,000 throats. The morning's gladiators are already gone, dragged out feet first through the gate of life like sacks of broken pottery. Their blood has soaked so deep into the sand that the next fighters will be slipping in it before the afternoon even starts. The crowd should be full. They should be quiet. They're not. They paid their assassina, they climbed the vomitoria at dawn, and a few sword fights aren't cutting it anymore. The emperor lifts one lazy finger from his purple throne. Trumpets blast so loud, the stone arches tremble. The great bronze gates grind open on freshly oiled hinges, and out stumble not warriors, not even criminals handed a rusty knife for false hope. Just people. Naked, bound, painted head to toe in gold leaf, or sewn into dripping animal skins, still warm from the slaughterhouse. Some are children clutching each other. Some are grandmothers who can barely shuffle. The editor of the games cups his hands and roars the line every Roman child learns before they can read, hoc habet. The entire stadium answers with one animal roar that rattles the statues on the roof. More! This wasn't Caligula on a bad day. This wasn't Nero drunk. This was Tuesday. And when even that stopped being enough, Rome invented new games so twisted, so perfectly engineered, that modern horror directors would blush and say, too far. Today you're walking straight into the mind of a crowd that watched this for fun, and you're going to see exactly how far they went when gladiators simply weren't enough anymore. It started small, almost polite. In 264 BC, a Roman aristocrat named Decimus Junius Brutus held a funeral for his dad and hired 3 pairs of slaves to stab each other in the cattle market. 6 guys, a few swords, a couple of minutes of blood. The crowd thought it was classy. By the time Julius Caesar rolled around 2 centuries later, classy was 320 pairs in a single afternoon, just so the voters would remember his name at the polls. When Trajan came home from crushing Dacia, he celebrated with 10,000 gladiators and 11,000 wild animals slaughtered across 123 consecutive days. That's 90 separate fights before most people had even finished breakfast. The crowd got spoiled rotten. By the middle of the 1st century AD, the philosopher Seneca was already complaining that the midday executions had turned into pure homicide because man, a thing once sacred to man, is now killed for sport and laughter. Seneca wrote that from the comfort of his marble villa, by the way. He still bought tickets. A normal day at the Colosseum had 3 clean acts. Morning, the Venationes, animal hunts, hundreds of lions, tigers, bears, elephants, hippos, rhinos, even giraffes imported from every corner of the empire, ripping each other apart while professional hunters in gilded armor posed like fashion models. Afternoon, the Munera, proper gladiators, trained killers who saluted the editor and sometimes walked out alive to fight another day. And in the middle, when the sun was highest and the wine was cheapest, the Ludi Meridiani, the midday show. It started as a lunch break with a few quick crucifixions, beheadings, or burnings at the stake, just enough blood to keep people from wandering off for a sandwich. Think of it as the ancient version of stadium hot dogs. Cheap, fast, keeps the crowd in their seats. Except the crowd started showing up early and staying late specifically for the hot dogs. Rome took one look at the demand curve and said, "Hold my wine." They built an entire underground city to feed the addiction. Under the arena floor, they carved the hypogeum, a dark, stinking labyrinth of corridors, cages, ramps, and 80 hydraulic elevators that could lift a full-grown elephant in total silence. One moment the sand is flat and empty, the next an entire forest rises out of the ground on wooden platforms. Real trees, real dirt, real deer sprinting for their lives. Trapdoors snap open and lions explode upward like demons from hell. Scenery flats painted with mountains spin on hidden pulleys, so a prisoner can be crucified on a rotating peak while the crowd laughs at the optical illusion. They could drain the place overnight, seal every crack, and flood the whole arena to chest height so warships could ram each other while the spectators stayed perfectly dry in the front rows. The Colosseum wasn't a stadium, it was the world's biggest, bloodiest pop-up theater, and the only critic that mattered was a mob screaming for the next surprise. And then came the fatal charades. Take every Greek myth you ever heard in school and strip away the acting. They grabbed condemned prisoners, noxii, people already legally dead, and forced them to become the characters, except the ending was real and permanent. A man dressed as Orpheus struts out with a lyre, surrounded by bears on golden chains. He plays. The bears sway for maybe 10 seconds. Then they remember they're hungry. Martial wrote the souvenir poem himself. The guy charmed the animals exactly like the legend, right up to the part where they tore him limb from limb. The crowd gave a standing ovation for historical accuracy. They forced another prisoner to dress as Hercules, handed him a torch, and made him light his own funeral pyre while the orchestra played funeral music. A woman playing Pasiphae was sewn inside a hollow wooden cow and wheeled out to meet a bull that had red pepper blown up its nostrils to make it extra motivated. They glued wax wings to criminals and catapulted them off scaffolding so Daedalus and Icarus could fall in real time, complete with authentic screaming. One man had to stand on stage and slowly burn his own hand off in a brazier just to reenact Mucius Scaevola, proving Roman courage to an enemy king. The audience brought wax tablets to time how long he lasted and argued later about whether he beat the previous record. The undisputed champion was a bandit play called Laureolus. In the scripted version, the hero gets crucified and a bear tears his guts out. Under Caligula, the director decided the fake blood wasn't convincing enough, so they nailed a real robber to a real cross and released a real Caledonian bear halfway through the performance. Prophecy fulfilled, prophecy literally dripping, tickets sold out for weeks. When the old myth started feeling repetitive, the emperors stopped asking playwrights for ideas and started treating the arena like a private laboratory with no ethics board. Domitian, the guy who loved killing flies with a stylus when he was bored, once ordered every torch in the Colosseum snuffed out at midnight. 80,000 people suddenly blind, screaming in total darkness. Then the gates opened and out ran prisoners wrapped head to toe in white sheets, faces smeared with flour, moaning like the restless dead. The crowd lit whatever torches they had left and hunted them through the stairwells and vomitoria like it was the world's biggest, deadliest, haunted house. You couldn't see the blood in the dark, but you could hear it and smell it and feel it splash warm on your sandals when someone finally caught a ghost. The next morning, the cleaners found pieces in places the sun had never touched. Nero preferred dinner parties with ambience. He invited Rome's elite to his private gardens, tied Christians to poles along the paths, doused them in pitch, and set them alight so the guests could keep eating while the flames lit the salad course. Tacitus says the human torches burned so long the party ran out of wine before it ran out of light. Somewhere between the fish and the honey cakes, Nero's guests were literally toasting, with cups raised to living, screaming candelabras. But the real masterpiece, the bit the crowd rewrote the schedule for, was damnatio ad bestias, death by animal, elevated from punishment to high art. They didn't just throw people in with lions and hope for fireworks. Rome hired directors. They curated the pairings the way sommeliers pair wine. Small, young women against bulls, because the humiliation of being chased naked was only the opening act before the horn went through the stomach, and the crowd got to decide if the scream was high enough. Fat prisoners versus elephants, slow, comical, almost gentle, until the first rib cracked like dry wood and the man disappeared under a grey avalanche. Dwarves versus ostriches, or, on special occasions, giraffes. little legs pumping, while a 7-foot neck pecked them to death like living popcorn. Professional bestiarii stood just off stage with red-hot irons, prodding the animals when they lost interest, making sure nobody got the mercy of a quick kill. One superstar named Carpophorus supposedly dropped 20 animals in a single afternoon. Bear, leopard, lion, even a rhino that charged so hard it cracked the protective wall. Cassius Dio wrote it up like a sports column. The audience wasn't passive. People in the nosebleed seats brought bags of bread crusts to throw and keep a chase going longer. Others carried pockets of stones to make the lions angrier. One afternoon, the crowd got bored with a guy outrunning leopards, so they started pelting him with rocks until he stumbled. The leopards finished the job in seconds. The emperor stood up, applauded the throwers, and handed out free season passes on the spot for audience participation. The animals themselves became celebrities. They shipped North African lions by the hundreds until the species vanished from the Atlas Mountains. Tigers came chained in cages, all the way from India. Bears arrived drunk on honey wine, so they'd be extra aggressive. When the supply lines got long, they started staging fights between the animals first, lion versus bear, elephant versus rhino, just to warm up the crowd. One emperor bragged he killed 5,000 beasts in a single festival. That's 25 planeloads of endangered species today, wiped out so Romans could watch them bleed out before lunch. And when the sand felt too small for their imagination, they took the show to water. Augustus started the fashion with an artificial lake dug outside Rome, 30 real warships, 3,000 condemned criminals rowing for their lives. The water turned pink before the first horn sounded. Claudius decided lakes were for peasants. He dammed an entire valley, flooded it, and put 19,000 prisoners into 2 fleets. When the men rowed out, they gave the famous salute, Ave Imperator, morituri te salutant. Claudius, feeling witty, shouted back, Aut non, or maybe not. The prisoners thought it was a pardon, dropped their oars, and started cheering. Claudius sent archers along the shore with orders to shoot anyone who didn't start killing immediately. They started. The water was so thick with blood that fish died for days afterward and washed up on the banks like red snow. Titus went bigger. In AD 80, he sealed every drain in the Colosseum, pumped in water overnight, and turned the same sand that soaked up gladiator blood into a sea. Warships rode in circles, while the crowd bet on which hull would crack first. Men drowned, chained to their benches. Others tried to swim and discovered the water only came up to a Roman's chest, perfect depth to keep fighting instead of escaping. When the final ship sank, they lowered the plugs, drained the arena in hours, raked the sand flat, and the afternoon gladiators came out to duel on a floor still slimy with seawater and floating body parts. The same people who cheered a child being torn apart at noon, bought bread from the same baker the next morning, nodded politely to the same neighbors, and argued about olive prices like nothing had happened. The games weren't a dark secret. They were the heartbeat of the city. All of this happened in broad daylight, in front of 80,000 neighbors who still had to buy bread from each other the next morning. The butcher who sold you sausage at dawn might be the same guy who spent the afternoon betting on how many seconds a pregnant woman could outrun a leopard. The senator in the marble seat with his name carved in stone sat 30 feet from a child being disemboweled and went home to kiss his own kids goodnight. Augustine tells the story of his friend Alypius, brilliant student, hated the games, swore they were barbaric. His friends dragged him along just once to prove how disgusting it was. Alypius kept his eyes shut tight, fingers in his ears. Then a man's stomach was opened 20 rows away. The crowd exploded. One drop of blood hit the air, and Alypius opened his eyes for half a second. Augustine says something inside him snapped like a cable. By the end of the day, he was on his feet, face red, screaming louder than anyone else in the section. One glimpse was all it took. He spent the rest of his life chasing that high. Money poured through the place like wine through a sieve. Entry was technically free after Vespasian, but you still paid. Scalpers outside, cushions to rent, food, gambling. The betting pools were enormous. How many animals would Carpophorus kill today? Would the next Noxius scream or stay silent when the lion took his face? Would the guy playing Icarus manage to flap his wax wings once before hitting the sand? Losers paid winners in gold right there in the stands, coins clinking while someone died below. Bookies ran tabs that lasted months. The entire Roman economy had a side hustle in death. Seats told you everything about a person. The emperor had his private box with purple silk awnings and slaves fanning him with peacock feathers. Senators got the front row marble benches with their family names carved for eternity. Knights sat above them. Ordinary citizens climbed higher. The higher you went, the poorer you were, until the very top rows were women, slaves, and foreigners crammed under the burning sun. But every single one of them could see the same horror perfectly. Distance didn't make it cleaner. It just made the screams echo longer. The games weren't hidden. They were the one place where a city of 1 million strangers felt like a single organism. War was far away on the frontiers. Plague came and went. Taxes were abstract. But in the arena, everyone breathed the same hot copper air, cheered the same kill, hated the same coward. Shared cruelty was the strongest glue Rome ever invented, and the supply never stopped. Trajan's 123-day festival needed 10,000 gladiators and 11,000 animals. That's an entire army of prisoners and a floating zoo shipped across the Mediterranean. North African lions vanished from the wild because Rome kept ordering them by the hundreds. Indian elephants disappeared from the trade lists. When the empire ran low on condemned criminals, governors started inventing crimes: piracy, desertion, sacrilege, anything that carried a death sentence. One province proudly sent a shipment of 300 Christians and 200 dwarves because dwarves were hilarious against ostriches. The games didn't end because Romans suddenly grew a conscience. Constantine banned gladiatorial combat in 325, supposedly for Christian reasons, but the beast hunts and fatal charades kept going strong. Prudentius was still complaining 70 years later that women were being raped by animals on stage for mythological accuracy. In 391, a monk named Telemachus jumped into the arena in Rome to separate two gladiators. The crowd didn't like the interruption. They stoned him to death on the sand. Legend says Honorius heard about it and finally banned gladiatorial fights for good in 404. But damnatio ad bestias dragged on another 300 years. The last recorded arena execution happened in Constantinople in 681. They ran out of money, prisoners and animals long before they ran out of appetite. Barbary lions went extinct. Indian elephants stopped appearing on the manifests. The supply chain collapsed before the demand ever did. We like to pretend we're different. We have laws, smartphones, therapy, true crime podcasts with trigger warnings. But every time traffic slows to film a burning car on the highway, every time a video of someone being humiliated explodes online and the top comments are laughing emojis and fire emojis, every time a crowd gathers around a fight in the school parking lot phones up, every time we refresh a live thread waiting for the next body count, that same voice comes crawling out of the stone. Hoc habit. The games never really ended. They just changed arenas. The sand is digital now, the lions wear algorithms, and the crowd is bigger than Rome ever dreamed. 80,000 throats have become 8 billion thumbs. The only thing that actually changed is we don't have to smell the blood anymore.